You won't believe how an arrogant billionaire faced a judge who wasn't afraid of his money. This story about justice and perseverance has turned the idea of power and law upside down. A billionaire named Daniel Crawford lived in one of the largest cities in the country. He was known not only for his condition, but also for his arrogant attitude towards others. His business empire spanned a variety of industries, from technology to real estate. Every word he said weighed a ton, and many were afraid to challenge his decisions. But in this world where money could buy almost anything, he did not expect that one day he would encounter a woman who was not afraid of his influence. Judge Laura Martin was known for her unwavering stance and strict principles. In her courtroom, laws ruled, not money. She was one of the few who did not succumb to the temptation of corruption, and her reputation was impeccable. Laura was born into a simple family and dreamed of justice from a young age. She knew that there was a lot of injustice in the world, and she decided to do everything possible to change it. Their clash began with the Crawford business corruption case. One of his former employees, who decided to speak out against him, filed a lawsuit claiming that Crawford forced him to participate in illegal schemes. Daniel believed that money could hush up any case, but he underestimated Laura's determination. At the first hearing, Judge Martin immediately stated her position. "Here we will consider the facts, not the wealth of the parties." Laura's words sounded like a challenge to Crawford, who was used to having his money solve any problems. Crawford, confident of his victory, hired the best lawyers in the country. He was confident that their experience and his condition would help him get away with it. However, the judge was adamant. She carefully examined all the evidence presented and asked questions that cast doubt on the testimony of Crawford's witnesses. The tension increased with each meeting. Crawford tried to intimidate witnesses, used his connections to influence the course of the case, but Laura didn't give in to the pressure. She knew that not only her name was at stake, but also the fate of people. The situation escalated when one of the witnesses disappeared. This came as a real shock to all the participants in the process. Laura realized that Crawford was willing to go to extreme lengths to save his name and fortune. She started her own investigation and soon found out that the witness was under pressure and was just afraid for his life. The judge summoned Crawford to her office for a personal interview. "I know about your methods," she said to his face. "You can try to intimidate people, but I won't let you ruin their lives for your well-being." Crawford was amazed at her boldness. He had never encountered such people. Usually everyone around him was either submissive or afraid to express their opinions openly. But Laura was different. She was ready to fight for justice to the end. During the trial, Laura began to draw public attention to the Crawford case. She organized public meetings attended by journalists and representatives of human rights organizations. This gave a new impetus to the cause. The public began to demand justice. Crawford realized that his money could no longer solve the problem. He began to lose the support of his business partners and investors who did not want to be involved in the scandal. Every day he became more nervous and aggressive. Laura continued to work on the case with full dedication. She brought in new witnesses and gathered evidence of corruption in Crawford's business. Each new fact undermined his defense and brought him closer to the truth. Eventually, the case went to trial. Laura presented all the collected evidence and witness statements. Crawford sat in the dock with a stony face, but fear was raging inside him. He understood that everything could end in disaster for him. The court session lasted several days. Laura made a powerful speech about justice and the need to protect the rights of citizens from the arbitrariness of rich and influential people. Her words touched the hearts of many present in the courtroom. Finally, the day of sentencing arrived. Judge Martin entered the courtroom with a serious expression on her face. Everyone present held their breath. She announced the court's decision. Daniel Crawford has been found guilty of corruption and abuse of power. The hall was filled with whispers of surprise and joy. Crawford was sentenced to several years in prison and a heavy fine. He lost everything: his fortune, reputation, and influence. Laura Martin has become a symbol of the struggle for justice and honesty. This story has inspired many people across the country. She showed that even the most powerful can be held accountable for their actions. Laura continued her career as a judge, but now her name has become known far beyond the courtroom. Shortly after the end of the Crawford case, Laura decided to use her popularity to fight corruption at a higher level. She launched a campaign to reform the judicial system and increase transparency in business. Her efforts have attracted the attention of the public and the authorities. Laura organized a number of conferences and seminars where important issues of justice and protection of citizens' rights were discussed. She began appearing on television and radio, sharing her experiences and encouraging people to fight for their rights. At the same time, she continued to hear cases in her court, remaining true to her principles of fairness and honesty. Every time she entered the courtroom, she was surrounded by respect and admiration from colleagues and citizens. Sometime after the Crawford case, Laura received an award for outstanding services in the field of law and human rights protection. It was a recognition of her work and efforts to fight corruption. However, even after all her successes, she remained a modest and purposeful woman. Laura understood that the struggle for justice is an ongoing process that requires time and effort. Her story has inspired many lawyers and judges to follow her example to be honest and resilient in the face of pressure from rich and powerful people. Laura has become a symbol of hope for those who believe in justice. Thus, the clash between Daniel Crawford and Judge Laura Martin became a turning point in the history of the fight against corruption in the country. It reminded everyone that justice will always find a way to defeat evil. People began to trust the judicial system more because they saw from Laura's example that the law can work even against the most powerful. This story has become a lesson for everyone: wealth cannot buy justice. Over time, Laura continued to develop her ideas about reforming the judicial system. She began working with various human rights organizations to create a platform for teaching young lawyers the principles of honesty and fairness. Laura also organized a mentoring program for law students where she shared her knowledge and experience with future lawyers and judges. Her goal was to train a new generation of lawyers who were ready to fight for justice as steadfastly as she did. At the same time, she continued to monitor cases of corruption in business and actively advocated for changes in legislation aimed at combating financial crimes. Her efforts have helped to draw attention to the problems of corruption at a high level of government. People began to see her as an opinion leader and a fighter for the rights of citizens. She often spoke at conferences and forums where she shared her experience in fighting corruption and spoke about the importance of honesty and justice. Laura understood that her work would never end. The struggle for justice requires constant attention and efforts from all citizens. She continued to inspire people with her determination and dedication. As a result, her story became an example of how one woman was able to change the system from the inside and show everyone that even the most powerful can be held accountable for their actions. Thus, the story of Daniel Crawford and Laura Martin has become a symbol of the victory of justice over corruption. She reminded everyone that each of us can contribute to creating a more honest and just society. Several years have passed since then, but the lessons of this story remain relevant to this day. People continue to fight for their rights and strive for justice in a world where money should not determine the fate of people. Laura Martin has become a living example of how anyone can change the world around them. It's enough just to have the courage to stand on the side of truth and justice. Her story has inspired millions of people around the world not to be afraid to speak out against injustice. And although the fight for justice continues, every step forward makes the world a little better thanks to people like Laura Martin. Chapter 1. The Beginning of the Path. Laura was born in a small town in the east of the country. Her family was not rich. Her father worked as a mechanic at a factory, and her mother was a housewife. Since childhood, Laura has watched the injustices that took place around her. Neighbors lost their homes due to debts, and some people suffered from the arbitrariness of local authorities. These observations shaped her desire to become a lawyer, defending the rights of those who could not stand up for themselves. After graduating from high school, Laura enrolled at a local university to study law. Studying was easy for her. She immersed herself in the study of laws and actively participated in student debates. Her teachers noted her abilities for argumentation and critical thinking. However, studying was not easy, not only because of the learning process. Laura had financial difficulties. To pay for her education, she had to work in cafes in the evenings. Despite the difficulties, she never lost hope for a bright future. Chapter 2. The first steps in the profession. After graduating from university, Laura got a job as an intern at a small law firm. She quickly established herself as a capable lawyer. Her ability to analyze information and find weaknesses in the arguments of opponents impressed her senior colleagues. However, she soon realized that working in private practice did not quite meet her ideals of fairness. Many clients were looking for ways to circumvent the law or use it for their own selfish purposes. This caused her internal conflict. Laura decided to change the direction of her career. She applied for a job with the state law enforcement agencies. Her dream was to become a judge, a person who could make decisions based on the law and protect the rights of citizens. Chapter 3. The Path to the Judge's Chair. After several years of working as a prosecutor, Laura was finally appointed to a position as a judge in a local court. It was a huge achievement for her. She could put her knowledge into practice and make decisions about people's affairs. Since the first days of her work, Laura has faced various cases ranging from minor offenses to serious crimes. Every day brought new challenges. She had to make decisions under the pressure of the emotions of the parties or public opinion. She understood the importance of her role. Every decision she made could dramatically change someone's life. Therefore, she tried to approach each case with maximum responsibility. Chapter 4. Meeting with Crawford. When the Crawford case came to her desk, Laura already had enough experience to understand the gravity of the situation. She knew about the billionaire's reputation. He was known for his aggressive business practices and connections with high-ranking officials. However, Laura was determined to consider the case objectively. It was a matter of honor for her. She understood that if she could achieve justice in this case, it would be an important step for the entire judicial system of the country. At the first court hearing, she noticed Crawford's confidence. She looked as if he considered himself untouchable. His lawyers were experienced professionals. They knew all the tricks to manipulate the process. But Laura was ready for this. She had carefully prepared for the meeting and studied all the case materials in advance. Chapter 5. Pressure from outside. With each meeting, the pressure on Laura increased. Crawford used his connections to create an atmosphere of fear around the trial. There were rumors about possible consequences for those witnesses who were going to testify against him. Laura understood the gravity of the situation. Some witnesses began to recant their testimony or simply disappeared. This made her think even more about how important it is to protect those people who were looking for the truth. She decided to take action. She appealed to law enforcement agencies to ensure the safety of witnesses in the Crawford case. Chapter 6. Challenging Society. Laura knew that if she wanted to succeed in this case, she needed to draw public attention to what was happening in court. She organized public meetings with the invitation of journalists and representatives of human rights organizations. This decision caused a strong reaction both among Crawford's supporters and among those who fought for the truth. The public began to actively discuss the billionaire's case. Every new fact became a sensation. Laura used this wave of interest to convey to people the importance of fighting corruption at all levels of government. from local officials to large businessmen. Chapter 7. Confrontation. Watching the trial, Crawford began to realize the threat to his position. He became more aggressive towards the witnesses in the case. Rumors of intimidation became more and more widespread. Laura understood that if she wanted to succeed in this business, she needed to act decisively. She appealed to law enforcement agencies to ensure the protection of witnesses. She also began to collect evidence of pressure from Crawford. Each new meeting became a real test for all participants in the process. The atmosphere was heated to the limit. But Laura remained steadfast. Her determination inspired the witnesses to continue fighting for the truth. Chapter 8. The Final Battle. When it came to the final court session, the tension reached its peak. Laura prepared a powerful speech about the need to protect citizens' rights from the arbitrariness of rich people. Her words sounded confident and passionate. Crawford sat in the dock with a stony face. He understood the gravity of the situation. His reputation was hanging by a thread. Every word Laura said could be decisive for his fate. Judge Martin presented all the evidence she had gathered. Each witness confirmed his position, fact by fact, destroying the billionaire's defense. When the moment came for the verdict to be announced, the hall froze in anticipation. Everyone present understood the importance of this decision for the whole society. Chapter 9. Consequences. The verdict came as a surprise even to many observers. Daniel Crawford has been found guilty of corruption. The hall was filled with whispers of surprise. Some people began to applaud. It was the moment of the triumph of justice over money. Crawford was sentenced to several years in prison. He lost everything, his fortune and reputation. His business empire was crumbling before his eyes. Laura felt great joy that she was able to achieve justice. Her efforts bore fruit. It was an important step forward for the entire judicial system of the country. Chapter 10. A New Era. After the Crawford case was completed, Laura realized that her work was not over yet. She decided to use her popularity to fight corruption at a higher level. She initiated a campaign to reform the judicial system. Her ideas were supported by both fellow judges and members of the public. People began to realize the importance of transparency in the work of government agencies. This became the basis for changes. Laura organized conferences on justice issues. Her speeches attracted media attention. She became a well-known figure among human rights activists. Chapter 11. Inspiration for Others. Laura's story inspired many lawyers to follow her example. They began to actively fight corruption within their profession. New ideas about honesty became the basis for the formation of a new generation of lawyers. Laura continued to work on reforms. She understood the importance of creating a support system for those people who face injustice from rich and powerful individuals. Her mentoring program has helped many young lawyers find their way. They have learned from her the principles of honesty and resilience in the face of pressure from society or the authorities. Chapter 12. Confession. A few years after the Crawford case, Laura received numerous awards for her achievements. Her work on combating corruption became an example for other countries. Many international organizations began to cooperate with her to develop new initiatives to protect citizens' rights. Laura continued to actively speak at conferences. Her voice became a symbol of hope for those people who believe in justice. She inspired millions of people around the world not to be afraid to speak out against injustice. Chapter 13. Future Challenges. Despite all of Laura's achievements, new challenges remained. Corruption continued to exist in many forms. She understood the importance of constantly fighting for the rights of citizens. Each new case became another test for the entire judicial system of the country. She continued to monitor corruption cases. Every time there was a new threat to justice, she was ready to speak out against it. It became a part of her life. The struggle for justice never stopped. Conclusion. The story of Daniel Crawford and Laura Martin became a symbol of the victory of justice over corruption. It reminded everyone that each of us can contribute to creating a more honest society. Thanks to people like Laura, the world is getting a little better every day. Her story inspires many to continue fighting for their rights. Every step forward makes the world a fairer place. Thanks to the resilience of people like Laura Martin, we can hope for a better future.